one section on, so like the employment law.
Yeah. You guys should have come at 5:30 because this is all not very relevant to you. But
I would have come at 5:30, but I went to end up going over to the gym at 3 and I didn't get home till just after 5 and I was absolutely buggered by the time I got home.
gotta get that workout in, and you probably only just escaped work.
No, it was like 20 minutes ago.
20 minutes, yeah. Oh,
Rough
man.
time to have a shower and leave.
Oh.
I got a yogurt.
Eh?
I got a yogurt. Yeah.
Alright, that's all good. How are we doing?
Yeah.
Not bad. What are we doing today? I don't know. I have no
We're just doing
idea.
employment. How would check me? We're going to do
Something.
We're
building
doing
employment.
finishing off leadership and practice so we can be done with it,
Oh, okay.
so that we can do that assignment, and then we can actually look at some interesting HR stuff like the employment legislation. Or you can tell me what you want to focus on, really, I guess.
I was looking at them, just been looking at that sort of conflict resolution,
Yeah?
that square thing, so looking at what that's your style of conflict resolution is. I'd probably, so I would say personally I'd be somewhere between accommodate and maybe compromise. Then I'd like to try and sort of sort
Yeah.
conflicts, but I'm sort of
Yeah.
not sort of just trying to find the right way to put it. I don't like conflict,
No.
but I'd like to make sure the conflict
That you
is
deal with it
sorted.
as well, yeah. Well, that's probably a good way to read. It's interesting to reflect on your own style, but I think your style also will probably vary a lot depending on what scenario you're in. You know, it's different at home versus the workplace. Here you go, old
I
man.
didn't read that one. Yeah. I honestly can't even read that with my glasses.
Alright?
Oh, look, I don't even need my glasses.
There we go, just for you, alright? We're just gonna kill a few extra trees.
That's really easy.
Yeah, I noticed there was no course forum post for last week, I don't think.
Was there supposed to be, is the question? There may not have been.
Oh, they might know.
Hang on, I have a look.
It's just I've been used to having a course forum post for each paper.
Yeah, I know.
Although there was that one week where we had, you gave us like 4 posts.
Yeah, well, that's right. So that's maybe why there wasn't one last week. So last week, what did we do? We did, here we go. So what are the 6 steps? Can you see through me?
Well, no, but I can see over you.
Yeah.
I'm not saying to get really big, but
Exactly. Not feeling invisible anymore, that's for sure. I keep bumping into things. Right. So we looked at effective listening, EQ, conflict management. So was there
Oh,
a
that's
post?
What was EQ again?
the emotional.
You tell me.
Emotional quotient there.
Yeah, thank you. Good. All right. Nope, there wasn't one for last week. But you might have 1, 2 for this week.
Oh, fun.
Yeah. Or even more, 3.
Good.
There we go. So yeah, I can keep you on toes. So looking back and reflecting on what we covered last week, what were the 6 steps for effective listening?
One of them was definitely feedback, like restating what you've heard so you
Yep.
can get a clear picture of what
Restating what you've heard. Good. So that's kind of along the research was it would have come under.
Well, was a question, wasn't it?
One was that comes under
Same
research
one.
as well.
opening
Yeah.
questions.
What are you doing, sorry?
6 steps for effective listening.
Effective listening.
Having ears.
Yep. So the first one was concentrate.
Yeah.
So stop and free yourself from distractions, remove physical barriers, be alert. Then it was acknowledge. Research,
Yeah.
ask questions, and reflect back by paraphrasing. Then emotional control, so actually trying not to have an emotional response, just hearing what the person is saying, regardless of whether they have a nail in their head. Really should just remove it. Sensing, so be aware of your tone and body language with message content, what are they telling you? And then structure, so listen for the main points and summarise what you've heard to check accuracy. Okay, that was a framework for effective listening.
That was sort of what I mentioned. I thought that would have come under structure because you're sort of stating back what you've heard.
Yeah, sure, yeah, that's the summarise. So what were the key components for emotional intelligence? Can you remember that?
I don't want to cheat.
No, that's right, cheat, go on, have a look.
Oh, no, I can't read, so that's not really much fun. Self something.
Oh, that's
Self-awareness.
Self-management.
Social awareness.
Yep, and relationship management.
Good. Yeah. So again, it's about developing your own understanding of yourself first and foremost, and then how you interrelate with others, and extend that into the workplace and things. So emotional quotient, emotional intelligence has been shown to be quite important for effective communication in the workplace. It does enable us to have that emotional control that's required for effective listening, for example. Being able to manage and monitor our own emotional responses. And what were the 5 conflict management styles? You've already mentioned some of them, Zane.
I can't remember the names of all of them, but I remember they were sort of lay on that sort of concern for self and concern for others.
Yeah.
There was avoidance on that, was low concern.
Avoidance, yeah.
And then you had the compromise, that was in the middle.
Yeah.
And assertive was basically you're more concerned for yourself. And then there was, what was the one, sort of high concern for others, but low concern for self, where you're just sort of trying to make everyone
It's
happy.
accommodating.
Accommodating.
Yeah.
And then there was one which I can't remember the name of it, but you're trying to make sure every person is happy. Collaborating, that's
Yeah. So collaborating, we've got high concern for self and others. Accommodating, high concern for others but not self. Avoiding, low concern for self and others. And competing, high concern for self but not others. And then in the middle, compromising somewhere. Okay, so those are the 5 conflict management styles. How do all of these skills that we looked at last week help us with HR management?
Help to understand people and get clear messages through information passed on.
Yeah, a big part of HR is about listening, communication, resolving conflict either between groups of staff or individual staff in the organisation, mediating, negotiating. So all of your listening skills, your conflict management skills will come in handy quite significantly for that process. Okay. And they're also really important for developing your leadership. Okay, abilities. So tonight we'll finish off on leadership and practice, and we'll look at what you need to do for that assessment. Last assessment there, okay? So you've got plenty of time to work away on that. Yes. Leadership and practice. So we've got political skills and shaping the organisation. So this is really about how you exercise some of your communication skills to have influence and political power within the organisation. So remember when we talked about sources of leadership power? Some of them were like referent power, expert power, legitimate power, so this is coming in, or coercive power. So this is coming into sort of that realm of having that referent power and the legitimate power, and how we use that to shape the outcomes that you want to achieve for the organisation. So how we actually get people to do what we want. So there's a lot of information in there around how do we influence others, I guess, influencing and managing up. So, they give you a bit of a framework in this material. So ask for what you want, first and foremost. If my motto always is, if you don't ask, you don't get. So ask for what you want. Build credibility. What are some things we can do to build credibility?
Set a good example.
Set a good example, yep.
Technically proficient.
Good, be technically proficient, absolutely, yep.
Treat people with respect.
Yeah, treat people with respect, yeah. It can be really hard. I remember when I started teaching here, I was 27 years old and half my class were older than, most of my students were older than me. Fortunately, I don't have that problem anymore, so you just hang around for long enough. But I was always that, well, credibility is a real issue, like, why should they believe what I have to say? So, establishing credibility through qualifications or experience or, building that up is one of the key ways to sort of gain some of that influence, so that people will listen. Use a rational argument. So this is about supporting your argument with facts and figures. And that's where what you guys are doing on the Diploma in Business is really like writing these essays and learning how to build in the research and the articles that you're reading to support your argument in your essays. That's about using rational argument and building your skills around that. Okay, so it's not just your opinion, it's somebody has done research on this that shows this. And there's always those people who remember facts and figures, build it into their argument. It's really hard to argue with somebody when they sound really persuasive,
What was the name of that website we get your scholarly articles from?
So it's called,
You mentioned just the website that's really good for
WorldCat. But it's actually down at the moment. The library staff are having a hard time because we can't get access to it.
Okay.
So if there's stuff that you want to look up, go and ask the library staff to help you, or email them and ask.
Yeah.
Email them and say, I really need some resources on this topic. I can't get into WorldCat. Can you help? Because they've got access to the Christchurch libraries as well, so they can actually get some stuff out of there. If you're a member of the Grey District Library, you should also have access to their online catalogues, so you can get through there. But there are, you can get some reasonably good stuff just on Google or Google Scholar. But
Time consuming.
it is time consuming and it's frustrating because you find things that you want and then you have to pay for it, or so that's
Several times I went up and that's trouble sort of trying to find all these references and stuff to use for essays. I find something, that looks like it'd be really useful, like crap, I don't read the abstract, I have to pay.
But use the stuff that we've provided for you as well. There's nothing wrong with referencing the material that we've actually given you to use. That's okay as well. So using rational argument and using storytelling to provide compelling arguments. So storytelling is really quite powerful and a persuasive tool, and it illustrates your point and it gets people to listen and all those sorts of things. Build allies. So this is about creating those networks within the organisation and knowing who your friends are and developing those. My husband says he always gives the reception staff chocolates when he first meets them because he knows that they're the ones that are the most important in the organisation. They're the ones that are going to help with filing and, paperwork and administration and all those things that you need help with. So
It always pays to be nice to IT.
Always pays to be nice to IT because they can help you or hinder you depending on where their inclinations lie. But yes, exactly. So building strong relationships and allies there is something to be said for that, essentially. And use the principle of scarcity. So by making people think they're getting an exclusive preview of information or something that's available for a limited time, you can generate interest and potentially influence. It's a real marketing sort of concept for influencing, and obviously influencing is useful for marketing purposes, but it's also useful for marketing yourself internally within the organisation in your role. So there was a really interesting book, Influence, The Psychology of Persuasion, Robert Cialdini, and there's a bit of a video on that. I don't think we'll watch the whole thing because it's quite long, but I'll give you a wee taster of it, and then if you've got time you can go on and have a look. Just need one. Here it is. Bring one. Somewhere down there. What next? Okay. There you are. Gotcha. It doesn't stretch that fast. I'm not even going to try clicking on my laptop. I'm just going to go straight there. Science of persuasion. Oh, we might better watch it.
Researchers have been studying the factors that influence us to say yes to the requests of others for over 60 years. And there can be no doubt that there's a science to how we are persuaded. And a lot of this science is surprising. When making a decision, it would be nice to think that people consider all the available information in order to guide their thinking. But the reality is very often different. In the increasingly overloaded lives we lead, more than ever, we need shortcuts or rules of thumb to guide our decision-making. My own research has identified just 6 of these shortcuts as universals that guide human behavior. They are reciprocity, scarcity, authority, consistency, liking, and consensus. Understanding these shortcuts and employing them in an ethical manner can significantly increase the chances that someone will be persuaded by your request. Let's take a closer look at each in turn.
So, the first universal principle of influence is reciprocity. Simply put, people are obliged to give back to others the form of behaviour, gift, or service that they have received first. If a friend invites you to their party, there's an obligation for you to invite them to a future party you are hosting. If a colleague does you a favour, then you owe that colleague a favour. And in the context of a social obligation, people are more likely to say yes to those that they owe. One of the best demonstrations of the principle of reciprocation comes from a series of studies conducted in restaurants. So the last time you visit a restaurant, there's a good chance that the waiter or waitress will have given you a gift. Probably at about the same time that they bring your bill. A liqueur perhaps, or a fortune cookie, or perhaps a simple mint. So here's the question. Does the giving of a mint have any influence over how much tip you're going to leave them? Most people will say no, but that mint can make a surprising difference. In the study, giving diners a single mint at the end of their meal typically increased tips by around 3%. Interestingly, if the gift is doubled and 2 mints are provided, tips don't double. They quadruple, a 14% increase in tips. But perhaps most interestingly of all is the fact that if the waiter provides 1 mint, starts to walk away from the table, but pauses, turns back, and says, "For you nice people, here's an extra mint," tips go through the roof. A 23% increase, influenced not by what was given, but how it was given.
So,
So the key to using the principle of reciprocation is to be the first to give and to ensure that what you give is personalized and unexpected.
The second universal principle of persuasion is scarcity. Simply put, people want more of those things they can have less of. When British Airways announced in 2003 that they would no longer be operating the twice-daily London-New York Concorde flight because it had become uneconomical to run, sales the very next day took off. Notice that nothing had changed about the Concorde itself. It certainly didn't fly any faster, the service didn't suddenly get better, and the airfare didn't drop. It had simply become a scarce resource, and as a result, people wanted it more. So when it comes to effectively persuading others using the scarcity principle, the science is clear. It's not enough simply to tell people about the benefits they'll gain if they choose your products and services. You'll also need to point out what is unique about your proposition and what they stand to lose if they fail to consider your proposal.
Our third principle of influence is the principle of authority, the idea that people follow the lead of credible, knowledgeable experts. Physiotherapists, for example, are able to persuade more of their patients to comply with recommended exercise programs if they display their medical diplomas on the walls of their consulting rooms. People are more likely to give change for a parking meter to a complete stranger if that requester wears a uniform rather than casual clothes. What the science is telling us is that it's important to signal to others what makes you a credible, knowledgeable authority before you make your influence attempt. Of course, this can present problems. You can hardly go around telling potential customers how brilliant you are, but you can certainly arrange for someone to do it for you. And surprisingly, the science tells us that it doesn't seem to matter if the person who introduces you is not only connected to you, but also likely to prosper from the introduction themselves. One group of real estate agents were able to increase both the number of property appraisals and the number of subsequent contracts that they wrote by arranging for reception staff who answered customer inquiries to first mention their colleagues' credentials and expertise. So, customers interested in letting a property were told, "Lettings? Let me connect you with Sandra, who has over 15 years' experience letting properties in this area." Customers who wanted more information about selling properties were told, "Speak to Peter, our head of sales. He has over 20 years' experience selling properties. I'll put you through now." The impact of this expert introduction led to a 20% rise in the number of appointments and a 15% increase in the number of signed contracts. Not bad for a small change informed from persuasion science that was both ethical and costless to implement.
The next principle is consistency. People like to be consistent with the things they have previously said or done. Consistency is activated by looking for and asking for small initial commitments that can be made. In one famous set of studies, researchers found, rather unsurprisingly, that very few people would be willing to erect an unsightly wooden board on their front lawn to support a Drive Safely campaign in their neighborhood. However, in a similar neighborhood close by, 4 times as many homeowners indicated that they would be willing to erect this unsightly billboard. Why? Because 10 days previously, they had agreed to place a small postcard in the front window of their home that signaled their support for a Drive Safely campaign. That small card was the initial commitment that led to a 400% increase in a much bigger but still consistent change. So, when seeking to influence using the consistency principle, the detective of influence looks for voluntary, active, and public commitments, and ideally gets those commitments in writing. For example, one recent study reduced missed appointments at health centers by 18%, simply by asking the patients rather than the staff to write down appointment details on the future appointment card.
The fifth principle is the principle of liking. People prefer to say yes to those that they like. But what causes one person to like another? Persuasion science tells us that there are 3 important factors. We like people who are similar to us, We like people who pay us compliments, and we like people who cooperate with us towards mutual goals. As more and more of the interactions that we are having take place online, it might be worth asking whether these factors can be employed effectively in, let's say, online negotiations. In a series of negotiation studies carried out between MBA students at two well-known business schools, some groups were told, time is money, get straight down to business. In this group, around 55% were able to come to an agreement. A second group, however, were told, before you begin negotiating, exchange some personal information with each other. Identify a similarity you share in common, then begin negotiating. In this group, 90% of them were able to come to successful and agreeable outcomes that were typically worth 18% more to both parties. So to harness this powerful principle of liking, be sure to look for areas of similarity that you share with others and genuine compliments you could give before you get down to business.
The final principle is consensus. Especially when they are uncertain, people will look to the actions and behaviors of others to determine their own. You may have noticed that hotels often place a small card in bathrooms that attempt to persuade guests to reuse their towels and linen. Most do this by drawing a guest's attention to the benefits that reuse can have on environmental protection. It turns out that this is a pretty effective strategy, leading to around 35% compliance. But could there be an even more effective way? Well, it turns out that about 75% of people who check into a hotel for 4 nights or longer will reuse their towels at some point during their stay. So what would happen if we took a lesson from the principle of consensus and simply included that information on the cards and said that 75% of our guests reuse their towels at some time during their stay? So please do so as well. It turns out that when we do this, towel reuse rises by 26%. Now imagine the next time you stay in a hotel, you saw one of these signs. You picked it up and you read the following message. 75% of people who have stayed in this room have reused their towel. What would you think? Well, here's what you might think. I hope they're not the same towels. And like most people, you probably think that this sign will have no influence on your behavior whatsoever. But it turns out that changing just a few words on a sign to honestly point out what comparable previous guests have done was the single most effective message, leading to a 33% increase in reuse. So, the science is telling us that rather than relying on our own ability to persuade others, we can point to what many others are already doing, especially many similar others.
So there we have it, 6 scientifically validated principles of persuasion that provide for small, practical, often costless changes that can lead to big differences in your ability to influence and persuade others in an entirely ethical way. They are...
You got them?
Yeah.
Are you persuaded?
I'll buy it.
You buy it? Yeah, you're right, yeah. Oh, there's some really fascinating research. This is all psychology, really, you know. It's the psychology. There's a really good book called How We Decide as well, which is all about decision making and covers a lot of this stuff around influence.
You might bump the monitor cable or something.
Thanks.
Yeah.
There we go. So, yeah, that's from that book, The Psychology of Persuasion by Robert Cialdini. If you ever have time to read a book. Yeah. Audio books are a good option.
I know, I'm looking at that at the moment, actually.
Yeah. Shane has a huge section of audio books because he doesn't read because of the dyslexia, so he listens and he listens well. He actually sinks in and he remembers it, and then he has that ability to sound credible and rational when use facts in an argument, which is just frustrating, actually. But they're really useful. for putting me to sleep. I'd much rather read and writing, but, you know, the library down at Grey Library, they've got audiobooks there that you can hire and listen to. You can download them online. That's another good way of, you can probably get, you know, most books these days you can get as an audiobook. So, gives you a bit of a chance to read when you might not otherwise. What are the ethical implications of influencing others?
You have to do it in a way that's not manipulating or
Yeah.
causing them not to have options.
Yeah, I mean, they're saying in that example that these are costless and ethical ways. You know, they're not having a harmful impact. They're just changing behaviours, which is the ultimate goal of what we're trying to achieve. But we have to make sure we're not changing behaviours in a negative way, I guess.
And truthful.
Yeah.
Like I'd say that 75% in this room
Yeah.
would be,
Is that true?
well, they've said that 75% of their guests do.
Yeah. Yeah.
But can they prove it's from this room?
From this room, yeah. This is
Which
true.
is, I'd say that would be,
That might be pushing the limit a little bit.
that'd be a bit more in line to me.
Ethical, so the ethical implications of persuasion and influence are quite significant, because obviously what we're trying to achieve is to get people to do what we want without them realise that we're trying to get them to do what we want. So yeah, the methods we use have to be sort of non-harmful. So we have to think, is the action consistent with the organisation's goals? Is it what the organisation would want to achieve? Not just self-interest. So if we're trying, for example, if we're trying to increase sales, as you can see, we've got plenty of tools that we can use to do that. That's not just in our own interests, it's in the organisation's interests. Does the action respect the rights of individuals and groups affected by it? That's another interesting one to consider. So think about, you know, if you're talking sales and you're selling, you know, you're selling a life insurance or health insurance to somebody who obviously doesn't need it, then is that ethical? Yes, it's in your interest, it's in the organisation's interest, it's in their interests. So you have to think about that. Does it meet the standards of fairness and equity? So we go back to equity issues. And would you want others to behave in the same way if that action affected you? And so, yes, the issues for influencing are thinking about the ethical implications and going back to some of those ethical rules. So I think in an organisation and management, we did look at some of the things that organisations can do to promote ethics in the organisation. Do you remember?
Yeah.
Sounds vaguely familiar. So we can have like a code of ethics. We can have ethics training, ethics committees, so especially where there's research involved and things, there's usually an ethics committee involved. We can have ethics audits if you're a larger organisation, or an ethics hotline. So there's multiple mechanisms for promoting ethical decisions and things in the organisation. The next part of this one is managing up. So this is sort of a catch buzzword, I guess, which essentially implies, you know, how do we manage influence our leaders? How do we, because we're not just talking about influencing our subordinates, we're talking about how do we influence those above us to do the things that we want them to do or need them to do as well. So be a resource for the leader. So this might mean supporting them. If you've got strengths in an area that your boss doesn't necessarily have strengths in, actually supporting them with that, you know. And some of the best leaders do surround themselves with people who are strong in the things that they're weak in. So, you know, if you're the general manager and you're strong in HR but you're weak in accounting, you'll make sure you've got a really strong accounting sidekick on board, and that's where you know, the person doing the accounting work can really help that leader. Help the leader to be a good leader. So we're essentially talking there about you know, giving feedback. So, you know, I think we've talked about 360-degree feedback in the performance appraisal process and things, but, you know, being able to give feedback to your manager, to your boss around how they're doing can, not always, but can help promote their ability to be a good leader. Obviously, it has to be done in a constructive, positive way, not a negative way, no abusive language. You had that discussion, and how did it go down? Not so well.
That's a subtle one.
Subtle, yeah, good.
Totally ignored it.
Totally, yeah. Yes.
Got it
Well,
offside and now no listen to it.
oh, yeah, so again, it's about, I guess, how you do that and whether they're open to it, you know, and that comes into their emotional intelligence as well, whether they're prepared to listen and take on board feedback.
First time, well, funny, he's a first-time manager. He's the second youngest out of a group of 10.
Yeah.
His boss, and he doesn't have the technical knowledge that anyone else has in the department.
Right, so that's hard.
Yeah, he's got the theoretical knowledge. But
Yeah, not the practical. Yeah. So he's in a situation where he lacks credibility, essentially.
Yeah.
He needs to build his credibility.
Yeah.
And surround himself with
Strong,
those, surround himself with those technical experts and use them, you know, like actually say, this is not my strong point, but I know that you're really strong in this, so you're going to help me out to make this happen. No, he's trying to just pretend that he knows everything. And
Well, no, it's really funny. Like he come from, he's a civil engineer. He's come from quite a background, so he can do pipes and all that stuff, which is great. But we're civil loading, infrastructure, and as I've met him doing this in 3 weeks into the job, he was telling one of our main offsiders who's been in it 30 years, why are we doing the job? He's going, sure.
yeah,
And our guy said, you're doing this wrong, you need to do something else. And he goes, no, it's all good. And 5 weeks later, he was making it way out what I said, because
that's counts.
so he's shooting himself in the foot.
Yeah, so he's trying to have influence by appearing to be, you know, in charge and knowledgeable, but he's not got it. So he needs to actually rethink his strategy. Okay. But you can help those people be good leaders, you know, if they're willing to listen to pointing some of the stuff out in a positive way. So giving specific examples, like when we were talking about, you know, performance feedback, giving specific examples can be one way of achieving that, and constructive, useful tips for how we can do better, not just, you know, that's no good. We want to actually build up the capability as well. Build a relationship with the leader, so based on trust and respect. Give feedback, accept constructive feedback from each other, and view the leader realistically. They are just fallible human beings, and they're never going to be perfect. So, you know, if you expect them to be human, then that gives them a lot more scope. You have a lot more sort of tolerance for their whole relationship, essentially. But I think what often happens is we expect our leaders they're getting paid big money, they're getting paid more than us, they should know what they're doing, they've got the qualification. So, you know, we buy into that sort of, they're not good enough at doing what they're doing. Whereas actually they're often in a very, very difficult situation and trying to make the best of a bad scenario. Middle management is often the worst position, really, isn't it? Because you're sort of...
Still got bosses.
Yeah, you've got bosses above you who have demands, and then you've got staff below you who have demands, and they're usually competing. They're saying cut the budget, they're saying we need more, and so you sort of the meat and the sandwich.
And you look like a bad guy because not from both.
Yeah, you look like a bad guy from both sides. So there's definitely a challenge for being even in that management position in the middle. Is definitely hard. Even at the high level, everybody expects everything of you, and you can't always deliver. So it's a hard place to be. The other important aspect about influencing and networking people is networking. So building those connections with people, and that's really something that's really strong in learning organisations where that shared knowledge and learning is promoted. So 3 key types: personal, operational, and strategic.
That sounds like the same. kinds of three types of organisational goals.
3 types of organisational goals, yeah. Exactly, there was the operational, the tactical and strategic, but essentially they're very similar, yeah. So we can, you know, create and foster those networks of people for different purposes. There's a good reading there for this week on how leaders create and use networks. So you can go and have a look at that one. A bit more.
Do we put all the readings up?
Yeah.
Okay.
If there's anything that's missing,
No.
no.
You know, I think first 2 weeks I was really behind my reading.
Yeah.
I read a lot.
You didn't. Well done.
That's why I forget everything. Yeah.
You went out and read them all for every week.
Yeah, I didn't realise it was because week 1, week 2, and then all the other stuff. I thought, man, we've got an enormously.
Yeah, no, it's used to honestly. Oh, okay. Lots to go in here with it.
I'm really shocked.
Actually, to be honest, for your assignment for this one, you have to choose 2 of these areas that we've looked at,
Yeah.
not all of them. So you can pick and choose what you want to focus on. Maybe think about, you could go with the things that you already know, because that might be easier, or you could go with the things that you don't know about, because that will be more challenging and interesting for you. So it just depends on where you want to focus your efforts there. So this stuff here, shaping the organisation. So one of the roles of leaders is to shape the future of the organisation in a strategic direction. And we talked a bit about that at the beginning of the course with strategic HR management. You know, we're talking there about buying into the overall organisation mission and vision and goals and strategy and where are we going to be in 5 years' time. But we also, you know, as leaders in the organisation need to be able to communicate that direction. So that's and this ties in with some of the decision-making approaches that we talked about in organisations and management. So the telling, selling, testing, consulting, co-creating. A slightly different language to what we used, but this we looked at within leadership models as well. So
you also did that old diagram about sort of what sort of the decision entails, like how major of a decision.
yeah, absolutely, yeah.
And sort of how a manager should.
It was the normative decision-making model, so that we can go through this sort of iterative process of saying how much risk is involved, how important is it, how likely is it that subordinates will buy into it. So that's a sort of situational approach to the decision making. But you know, we have to think about the telling is when we're obviously just telling people what needs to be done, and we're not necessarily getting their buy-in. Selling is still a one-way process, but we're trying more to persuade people to engage in that. So we're trying to emphasise the benefits to get people to buy into it. Testing is where we use interactive communication, so what excites you about this vision, so getting people to think about it and check out where their feedback might be around that. Consulting is about actually getting teams involved and getting representatives in to discuss and meet and talk about the options. And then co-creating, which is also collaborative, which is about actually trying to build the vision for the organisation from the bottom up together as a team, you know, rather than this is what our proposed vision is, what do you think about that? Hey, let's come up with a proposed vision as a team and work that out together. So again, it's kind of that somewhere on the spectrum between autocratic and democratic process.
I mean, at what stage in the organisation would you do that? Because you need people to be able to create it, but without something to start with, you don't have the people.
Yeah,
And
sure.
it's basically
It's a
like
catch-22.
Well, it is really because you need to have a major organisation to be able to make that to happen. You know, like at least a sort of small to medium size. But what? Yeah, unless you have a lot of money to start with, so you could just.
Yeah, I mean, I suppose this could be a process of reinventing the organisation.
Yeah, it could be
So you've got
restructure
something
or
in place
something.
already and you're looking at restructure or a significant change, or hey, it's time to review our 5-year plan, you know, like where are we going, what are we trying to achieve? Let's come up with this together. So but it does depend on the culture, and it does depend on some of the external environmental factors that we talked about in other parts of the course, you know, like how much time pressure are we under, what resources do we have, you know, you have to consider those factors before we can decide which approach we're going to take. Are subordinates going to buy into the process if we just simply tell them? Not necessarily, but in a high risk industry, they have to, you know, where health and safety is the issue, we have to be able to have a sort of telling kind of a culture and have that work. You know, it's like where the military sort of, yeah, we'll go for a collaborative approach. What do you think we should? Do you think we should go to war with these people or not? You know, in those sorts of situations, you have to have strong, authoritative decision making to actually, you know, have somebody make a call. So we also can talk about shaping the organisation. So in terms of formulating the strategy. So looking at those conversations, the climate forward discussion and dialogue and listening, and using the leader to sort of come up with, you know, tell the stories, emphasise why this needs to happen, you know, try and persuade people rather than tell. So to come up with that shared organisation direction. So, you know, when it comes to the strategy is how we're going to achieve the vision, so we still need to get buy-in through that process as well. The more buy-in we can get, the more likely people are to engage in the decisions that you've made. So that's where we're going with that. So all of this really feeds into that. You've got a few readings, you've got a couple of course forum posts, but primarily it's time to, you know, get on with that next assessment.
Yeah, that and the other 6, 7 I've still got them to go, but I've got to have done by the end of June.
Nah.
I am getting sort of through them. I'm sort of on track to have them done.
So this last one is worth 35%, so it is reasonably significant.
Yeah.
I put 15th of June on there, but yeah, the sooner we get them done, the 2,000 words. You know, again, same, use the essay format, use the, I'll just try and make that bigger.
I can see that fine.
Again?
It's short, but I can't see.
Right, okay. Wow, interesting. So, you know, so the essay question is evaluate the application of 2 leadership concepts in a business environment of your choice. You may choose concepts from the following areas. So we choose 2 of those different leadership concepts. First and foremost, you need to describe the leadership concept, the theory or the model. You know, so outline what is involved in this particular model that you're talking about, first and foremost. And then how it is applied in a particular business environment. Now this is where, you know, they are asking you to apply it in an organisation in which you're familiar with. So that should be right for you, Ian, because you've got work.
15 jobs I've been to,
Yeah, exactly. Zane?
I've got a couple of businesses I'm sort of semi
involved in, yeah, that's right. You're doing a bit of work, voluntary stuff as well. So.
yeah, I suppose in the patrol would possibly count.
Yeah, absolutely it would. And
Seems
that's where
seems
someone's...
I'm the chairman.
You're the chair. Yeah,
But
so...
even then, I sort of
Yeah.
don't sort of. My mother, she's the secretary, treasurer, and trainer, so she handles a hell of a lot more than I do.
Yeah, why is it that secretaries always do all the work? I'm not quite sure about that, but anyway. But as the chair, you know, you can look at how are you managing conflict resolution, or how are you could look at using something from what we've talked about and think applying it in the role that you're in, and what you're having to do here is think about how did that impact in that business environment. So you take one of the concepts, apply it, and think about what the impact was, positive or negative.
Certainly one example I can think of this year at least where conflict resolution has had to be used to a certain extent, but without going into any detail. But if I was to use that, I'd have to I'd have to make sure it was alright with the patrol, but I would have to be careful with who I asked because we fix around.
So basically, it's only me that's going to read them plus the external post moderator.
Yeah, so I don't know who knows.
You could blank out, you could make up the organisation name. That's the other. You could say this is a fictitious organisation name.
Yeah, it is.
And don't include names, but obviously you can.
So, say for example you chose influencing people.
Yes.
Then for each of those 4 bullet points, you'd have to show how the influencing people model affected
Yeah.
each of those questions.
Yeah.
So effectively answering each of those questions twice.
Yeah, for each of the things.
For-
Yeah. So how did so if you chose influencing people and emotional intelligence, you'd have to answer how did the influencing people impact positively or negatively in that business environment? How did the strategies you?
But, so that's what got me to want to read this. It says and how it was applied in a particular business environment.
Yeah.
That means you have to know one of those models and that it was applied.
Yeah. But that's why theoretically they're getting you to go out and do this. Okay. But if you can't, if you're not in a position to be able to do that, then you could do this retrospectively in terms of a theoretical,
Right.
like it was apparent that this particular strategy was applied in this scenario and this was the outcome. You could go back and sort of rethink about some of the scenarios that you might have been through. Okay, so your assessment of how appropriate it was to apply the leadership concept in that particular business environment, and an evaluation of how well it was applied, including any particular strengths or weaknesses, and any lessons that can be drawn from the experience. This is rather complicated, I know, there's lots to it, but look at the marking schedule. Again, so you've got 25, and look at the word count, 25% for considering various contemporary leadership concepts and how they can be implemented to manage teams effectively. You show a strong understanding of the theory or framework behind a leadership concept and explain how it was applied in a credible manner. Okay, so that's sort of question 1 is worth 25%. Question, I think the next part is question 2. Examine the importance of leadership style in managing people and dealing with problems in the team environment. The student provides a thorough assessment of how leadership style impacts results and application of the leadership concept. Okay, so we're there looking at thinking about how important it was and what was the impact in dealing with issues in the team, okay? So try and tie that in. I'm going to mark on the marking schedule, okay, so read those as most important. Evaluate the application of leadership concepts in business environments. So that's another 25%. How effective was that, and identifying your lessons learned. Then you've got organisation or logic, so that's structure, sound arguments, that's 5%. Writing, 5%, that includes your spelling and grammar, presentation. Research, 5%, so that's including your sources and looking at 4 to 5 scholarly sources and how well you've integrated that. 5% for your APA referencing and 5% for your reference list. Okay, but think about your word count in relation to, we've got 25, 25, 25 for those areas.
2,000 words, 8 questions.
Yeah. So you'll have an introduction and a conclusion. So take off, say, 300 words for those, where you're left with 1,800 words for this 3 main areas. So
8 questions.
So you've got to split them by, because you've got to do it twice for each
200
one. So you have
words
to be
a
quite
question.
concise. This is a really,
Just put a 0 on the end, I'll be happier.
Didn't you say that the first assessment for this, you got up to what's it,
8,000. I hadn't even finished on this day, but that's the
um,
thing, like,
yeah, remember you can go plus or minus 10% on the word count, you know, so
Yeah.
2,200 words is about the limit, really. But yeah, it's a complicated question,
It is.
unfortunately. So it will need a little bit of thought, but you've got lots of time because we're really,
he's got lots of time.
yeah, here's time, you got
yeah, I only work 70 hours a week.
Well, that theoretically is the end of our teaching sessions for this paper. So the remainder of the time for this paper is committed to finishing
Yeah.
off the assessment work. The question is, do you want to come back and do some of the HR content that I've mentioned?
Well, we talked last week, wasn't it, you wanted to look more to recruitment, wasn't it?
Recruitment and selection. So I could do a session next week on recruitment and selection. And then we'll see, and then we'll go from there. Like, if you want a session on employment legislation, we can do another session on employment
That'd
legislation.
be interesting to look at that in a bit more detail than what I have.
Yeah, but this, you know, from here on, it's kind of
Whatever.
yeah, discretionary stuff. But I think you probably should know if you come out of a level 6 HR paper.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. All right. Well done. And we will.
Why did God mean muscles?
Confuse you.
Yeah.
How long have you been doing the gym for?
Well, I've been a member for a couple of years, but I've sort of only recently started going for the last couple of months. So I was a bit lax, sort of going. But I've actually been working out with